Hello and welcome. My name is Jeff Miller, and I am a technical solutions architect with Cisco Systems, covering modern data center architectures, such as Cisco ACI, Tetration, and Cloud Center. Today we're going to focus primarily on the fabric access policies by the way of initial fabric bring up. Most customers, get this shiny new ACI fabric, they get it plugged in, and they want to start, plugging things in and using it. Well, before you do that, ACI needs a little what I call pre-plumbing to really do it and make it easier on yourself. And so there's some things that I like to do first time around that may be in documents, may not be in documents. And I get customers and peers ask a lot of times, hey, where's that in a document? And I go, I don't know. I've just been doing this for 2 years, and some of it is what I know, and some of it's from documents. So none of this is by any way, shape, or form meant to be validated designs. These are solely examples and mostly just the way that I have learned to do things over the last couple of years. So with all that being said, let's get going. So this is my lab ACI fabric. It is currently running 2.1.1h, which at this point in time is the newest. So I'm going to log in. Hopefully I remember my password here. And we're not, again, I'm going to make a lot of different other videos, so we're not going to focus a lot on dashboards or health scores today. So we'll jump right into the fabric tab. And the first policies that I jump into are the fabric policies. So when I first get into a fabric, there's a couple things in here that you will probably want to set. So we'll go to pod policies and then policies. So I'm going to want to go and set NTP. Okay. NTP is going to be used for all the health scores. I can simply go into the policy default, add an NTP server here. If I click add, put in just I don't need to pick anything else. I don't think. Yeah, default would be out of band anyways. Submit. Okay. Pretty simple. The next thing I want to do in this particular section is my Bgp Route Reflectors. I already have these because this is a working fabric, but the important things here are I need an autonomous system number. This is generally going to be in the private ASN space, so 65,000 or higher. My networking engineer friends out there will understand that concept pretty easily, but if you don't know networking, just pick 65,000 and you'll be fine. This is only used internal. I will then add, I already have 2 in here, but if I were to click the add button, I would add my node ID. I can actually just delete, we'll just delete this one, and then we'll re-add 2202. Okay, submit. It's pretty simple. You put in the node IDs of your spines. Again, I'm not covering the provisioning of fabrics. I provisioned these and gave these node IDs under provisioning, so no big deal there. The next thing I need to do is create a policy group. I happen to always just call it default because there is not a default one. Within this default, the only thing I'm really picking here are all my defaults because I use the default date and time, I use the default route reflectors. The general rule of thumb in my mind is unless you know exactly what you're doing, just use the defaults. Or unless you need to create a specific construct, use the default. Okay? So all we're doing is taking all these defaults. You see resolve time, date time policy default, ISIS, and so forth. We then go to the profiles. There is a pod profile default. All we're doing here is expanding this out, going to the default, and then selecting our fabric policy group default, which we did right here. Cool? You have to do this, otherwise your multi-protocol BGP won't work and your date time, your NTP won't get deployed properly. Okay? The next thing you're probably going to want is DNS. And the reason I say you probably want DNS is that as you add things like vCenter integrations, those are generally going to be referenced via DNS name. And from my experience, the guys that are involved in those type of integrations really don't like to use IP addresses as much as network guys do. So it's good just to have DNS configured in the event that you want to configure an item that references a DNS name. So again, using the default here, we're just hitting the add button and adding DNS names. I don't think I need to do that, but we'll keep going. So under the fabric policies, that's it. That's all I need to do there when I first bring it up. All right, access policies, there's quite a bit more. So we'll move on to there. So this section is actually somewhat of the reason that it, is why we came up with the wizards and the basic GUIs and things like that, because there's a lot of different cross-referenced objects in this particular section. Anytime I want to plug something net new into the fabric, I'm going to come to the fabric access policies first. I need to create a construct or a object chain that tells me everything about the layer 2 of that object itself. Is it an access port, or is it a port channel, is it a virtual port channel, right? If you do this quote-unquote pre-plumbing ahead of time, this section gets really simple. And my goal here is not to say this is the way you have to do it, but my goal when I teach this section this way is that you get a better understanding of how the objects work, and then as you play with and configure the fabric yourself, you can come up with your own ways to do things. Obviously, it's very flexible, but I think if you understand the structure of the objects, your life will get a lot easier within ACI. So it's really kind of a bottom-up approach here, and we'll start at the pools section. So you'll notice you can do VLAN, you can do vSAN now with 2.0 and later, and then we can do VXLAN. These are going to be pools that are going to be either used for basically like an allowed list of VLANs when you start to configure external access for hosts or switches, or as you integrate VM networking, these will become dynamic allocation pools possibly, right? Primarily we're using VLANs because of the hosts that connect to the fabric today are still talking, for the most part, 802.1q. We are seeing VXLAN growing on the host perspective, but not quite as much yet. So most things are VLAN based. So if we were to create a net new pool, which is what we're going to have to do, we'll call this, we'll just call it demo pool. Okay. And I make everything, there's a parent-child relationship here. I generally make every pool dynamic. And the reason being, as I add in-cap blocks, I get the option of dynamic, inherit, or static. Dynamic, obviously, is going to be a dynamic pool. Dynamic pools are only used for VMM or virtual integrations. Static pools are used for basically everything else. So when I connect a host and I want to use a specific .1q encapsulation, or if I connect a layer 2 out to a network, all those things are static. So I could sit there and say VLANs 100 to 200 are going to be used for static allocation. I could also say VLANs 300 to 400 would be used for dynamic allocation. Now obviously I could also inherit from parent since the parent is dynamic, but I like to specify them. And here's the beauty of the dynamic parent is if the parent's dynamic, I can have both static and dynamic underneath it. This just means that I can have less pools as we go on. This was introduced, the parent configuration was introduced in, I believe, 1.2. So anything 1.2 or later, you can do this. If you choose to make the parent static, the only thing underneath it can be static. Okay, makes sense. Pretty simple. All right. So first thing we need to do is we have to have a pool, because as we configure policies under the tenant space, which we're not going to cover in this video, we're going to reference, .1q connectivity, right? So we have to have a pool. I'll close that up. Then we have these domains. So there's 5 types of domains today. We have physical domains, external bridge domains, external routed domains, fiber channel domains, which are new. And then under here in this tab right at the top here, VM networking, there's a VMM domain, right? The domains are how we tie the tenant policy space back to the fabric space. I kind of equate it, whether it's right or wrong. I equate this to, the fabric is kind of the physical underlay and the tenant is the overlay configuration. Basically, the tenants are where we actually configure policies, which get instantiated as configuration on switches, so that traffic can pass, basically. We generally work a lot with physical domains. Those are what we're going to use to apply in the tenant space as a reference point. External bridge domains are if we want to create an external bridged EPG, so a layer 2 that's outside of the fabric and we want to apply policies to. External routed would be anything that's a routed EPG. So, my OSPF out, my BGP out, my GRP out, those things I would need an external routed domain for. Fiber channels, obviously, when we're doing FCOE. And then the VMM domain is when we're integrating with things like vCenter, not Hyper-V, but Microsoft and OpenStack. So I'm going to create just a net new physical domain. And we're going to follow the same concept as we did before. You'll notice my naming is whatever the thing is with the type of object it is. That is the general recommendation, is functionality and type of object. Okay. I don't have an AEP yet. We do have a pool that we just created, so we'll do this demo-pool and we'll submit. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is create an AEP. The AEP is the part of the glue, kind of, if you will, that when we actually go to create interfaces, we'll pick an attachable access entity profile. All that's doing is it's saying, which domain can I use, and the domain is saying which pool am I allowed to use. These are just there for, allowed policy configuration. If I configure a tenant that references a domain, that references a pool, that same structure needs to be the interface which references an AEP, which references a domain, which references a pool. I know it sounds confusing. You'll get it as we go through this. This stuff is all, I like to call this stuff rinse and repeat. The more you do it, the easier it's going to be. So we'll create a new AEP, and we're just going to follow the same scheme here. We'll just name it Demo AEP, and we're just going to add that physical domain that we just created, so the demo phys. We update that. We'll notice we see VLANs 100 to 200, 300 to 400. Those are the VLANs that we created under the pools, right? Everybody remembers that. And we're just going to say finish, and we're done with that part too. So if you keep up, we've created a pool, we've created a physical domain, and we've created an AEP. Alright, good so far? The next section is a little bit more involved, which is the interfaces, policy groups, and profiles. I'm not going to go through all the policies, but I do highly recommend you spend some time and under link level pre-configure some commonly used things. So I have this one called link 1 gig. I created this. Basically all I'm saying is that if I use this object, it's going to specify 1 gig, and so on and so forth. I've got a 10 gig, I've got a 25 gig, I've got a 100 meg, and I've got one called link auto, which is the same as the default, mind you, but as you're going down to configure interfaces, you're going to hit a drop-down box, and it's going to show you all these options. If I don't know what default is, if someone else comes in the system and behind me and they don't know what these things are, they'll know that auto probably means auto. So I just like doing it that way. Okay? Then I come down to CDP and I do something similar. You'll see I have a CDP off, a CDP on. You'll see there's some other auto-created things in here. Let's not focus on those. But these are basically just CDP on and off, so that when I'm configuring interfaces, I have it pre-plumbed, it's easier to pick from. I'll then do the same thing for LLDP. We've got an LLDP on, LLDP off. Okay. In port channels, a little bit different. I'm going to create these four. So LACP active. As you look over here, all I'm doing is picking mode active, leaving all the defaults. I know some people just suspend individual ports. Some people get into on the Nexus side, basically meaning that if all of the ports aren't up, don't let it work at all. But if you uncheck this, some of that works. MAC pinning is not really LACP, although I did name it that, but whatever. But MAC pinning is used for things like ESX integration, so that you can have load balancing across links. LACP passive is LACP passive, no shocker there. And then we have a static mode on configuration. I just recommend configuring these four. What you name them, I probably shouldn't have named this LACP MAC pinning. I did. You'll also realize really quickly there's no rename. Just the way it is. I would have to delete this and recreate it. I don't feel like doing that. So really those four all I do from a day one perspective. I do all my link levels, I do my CDP, I configure my LLDP and my port channel options. Okay? Pretty simple. I skip policy groups, even though we'll come back to that for now, and I go right to profiles. I configure, or I recommend, at least from the starting gate, configuring these as if they were the switches themselves. So if I were to click on Leaf Profiles, you'll see that I've got all these Leaf Profile names configured, and you'll see these interface selectors. If I were to expand one of these out, I see I configured ports. These are what I actually named them. But I generally recommend doing these as a one-to-one perspective. And let me actually just focus on this. So in this one in particular, I named it Leaf 2102 Interface Profile. If I were to delete this, and we'll just go back and recreate these things, I would come in, I would say net new, create Leaf Interface Profile, Leaf 2102 dash, I do underscore here, PROF. And I'm gonna leave all this blank. Again, this is just pre-plumbing stuff. And I'm gonna submit that, and there's back again. I just wanted to show you what it looks like when you create it, in case you need to create it. After I create all of these, and these are all gonna be one-to-one, so I'm gonna say Leaf 2101, Leaf 2102, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. You'll also notice I have one that's a pair. So 2101 and 2102 as a pair. So these two as a pair. What that means is as I create ports under this, it ultimately gets applied to both. So the net is I'm recommending that you create a Leaf interface profile. So interface policies, profiles, Leaf profiles. Create a profile for one-to-one. So every single Leaf you have, and then every single what you would consider like a VPC pair. So for every 2 Leafs, you're going to have 3 profiles. So 1, 2, and 3. Okay, makes sense? And I named this one something different, so let me delete it because I don't like that. Leaf 2102 Pro. Right. After we create all these, we're going to come up and look at a couple things here, but since we're talking about profiles, we'll just focus solely on this. You'll notice these look almost identical. So the switch profiles are the profiles that get applied to the actual switches. Here I recommend doing the exact same thing. I recommend creating a one-to-one relationship. So I have Leaf 2101, 2102, and then I have one that's a pair. Within these, you'll see a couple things. I see the actual switch selector that I created, which switches are involved here. Obviously I'm picking the one. I could pick more. And then this 2101, which is this interface profile here. So let me go through and create one. I'll delete this one. just so you can see a reference point. So if I were to create a net new one, so we created this 2102 down here, now we'll create the leaf 2102, and I'll call this one a switch profile since it's a switch profile. We'll have leaf selectors, and we'll just call it leaf 2102, and I'll call it SW for switch selector, and I'm just going to pick the one. Okay, update that, click next. Then I'm going to probably have to expand this out. I'm going to go find my interface profile, which is this one I created down here, right? So it's important to do this in order. I'm going to grab the one that I created down here and say finish. Now if we look at this, I see the switch selector I created saying that we're using leaf 2102. The fact this is called blocks, don't yell at me. I didn't name these things, but this is basically the actual node ID. Should probably be called node, whatever. And then you'll see where I've associated this selector profile, right? So that's it. So if I create these leaf profiles and these switch profiles, now whenever I want to add something into the fabric, all I have to do is add a port under these leaf profiles. These are already assigned. We see it's already assigned here. I don't need to come back up here and create a new switch profile or add any other interface profiles. I'm not saying you can't and you shouldn't. This is just a matter of understanding, and this helps people rationalize where these objects live, right? While I'm in the switch policy section, there's one more important thing that you have to do when you first bring up the fabric, and this is virtual port channels. We do VPCs just like you do in the Nexus side, except as you probably figured out, we don't directly connect any switches. So the VPC peering is done over the fabric. In order to do that, I have to tell it, you know, which switches are in pairs. Okay, I'm going to, I don't want to delete any. But what happens is I name, so if I want to create a name, I would name it leaf. In this case, I did underscore 210, let's just call it 5, 2106, and I named them VPC because that's what they are. I don't have a 5 and 6, so if I were to create these, I generally pick, you'll notice, logical pair IDs. I need a pair ID just like you do in the Nexus side. I usually pick the first member. Reason being is that I know it's never going to be overlapped. I'm getting an error here, probably because it was too big. So in this case, 105. Would suffice. These are sort of irrelevant. You just can't reuse them. If I were to hit submit here, it would go and configure this VPC peer. I'm going to cancel this. I just want to show you what that looks like. You'll also notice that we assign a TEP address. This is because we're using the fabric as the peering links. So I need communications through the fabric in order to make this work, right? So I can configure this interface profile, apply it to the switch profile, and VPC still won't work if I don't have VPC peering set up. Okay, so it's very important to at least set that up. It's very simple. All you do is give it a name, tell which switches are involved, give it an ID, submit, you're done. Again, I'm only modifying the default here. There's no reason not to. So we'll collapse this. Okay. Hopefully that's made sense so far, right? So now, basically, you log into the fabric and you say, I want to plug something in. Okay? There's really, since we've done so much legwork up front, there's really only two things you need to do now. Okay? And that's come to the interface policies. And I'm going to go to this policy groups section now. We haven't hit there before. This is the first thing to do, right? I'm going to come here. I'm going to right click on the policy groups. Or I can always use this Actions tab over here too if you don't have a right mouse click. I'm then going to specify, is this going to be an access port, a port channel, or a virtual port channel? Okay. I'm going to pick a VPC because it'll show us more of our options. Okay. I'm going to give this thing a name, demo dash VM, we'll call it ESX dash access, or this is VPC. I can come down through. You'll notice my link level policies. These are the ones we specified under policies, right? I don't recommend picking one unless you have to. The more you can leave default, the better off you are, right? One of the things you'll notice quickly is I can pick all these things. I don't have to, right? The only reason we show them to you because this is a GUI, right? It's not a command line. So we have to show you the options that are available to you. Doesn't mean you need to use them all. I can pick CDP on or off. We'll do that. It's not going to hurt anything. I'll pick LODP on. Again, it's not going to hurt anything. I can go ahead and pick a policy. It's 10 gig. It's fine. If you ever want to delete any of these, you just hover over them and delete them. Okay. And then I'm going to come down to the port channel policy. There's two more things that are important here. I'm going to pick LACP. This is ESX. We're probably going to do MAC pinning. And the next most important thing, these are the attachable entity profiles we talked about at this point a while ago. But this is, again, the glue of the interface. So we're saying that this interface in particular is going to follow this path of AEP, which, for anyone out there paying attention, references a domain. That domain references a VLAN pool. Basically what we're saying is when a policy actually gets configured for traffic to flow over this interface, if it's traffic that is tagged with a tag that is outside of what's allowed, it will throw up a fault, and you will need to troubleshoot that fault. Okay? So we're going to pick that. So really, outside of if we didn't pick anything here, and I've got some sort of password system here. If we didn't pick anything, the only things we absolutely have to have, this is VPC. We have to pick a port channel policy, and we have to do an AEP. The rest of it is optional. I can submit this. And now I have this. This is my policy. This is all of the constructs necessary to configure whatever this device is going to be. Keep in mind, as you go to add new ports, port channels and VPCs have to be unique. I'll repeat that. They have to be unique. Okay? Just like they do on the Nexus world. I have to have separate port channel interfaces for every single port channel. Right? Leaf access ports can be reused. So the question is, should you create, snowflakes or unique objects for every access port? That's going to fall onto you. If you're going to use 100 different PDUs and I just want to create one PDU access port as a good example, that may be fine. But it's totally up to you. These have to be unique. Port channels and virtual port channels, you have to create a net new one for every single one. Okay? So after we create this, we're then going to go to our profiles. So step one was to create a policy under policy groups. That was pretty simple. Then we go and find where we want to put it. I want to put it on this pair of leaf 2101 and 2102. Okay? I'm going to create what's called a port selector. Over here. I generally just name mine the port because as I drop the thing down, I like to see what ports are configured. These are totally arbitrary names. I would, as always, keep things. My mantra is keep it as simple as possible, yet meaningful. So let's just go ahead and create port 14. It's probably not in use. 1/14, and then we're going to find our policy group. That's it. Okay, so I just said I want to plug in a new ESX box. I created a policy group. Oh, let me submit this. So I just said, like I was going down the path of saying I wanted to add a new ESX. Here it is. This is what we created. So I create this. That was pretty simple. Then I come down to where it wants to live in the fabric. And then I create this access port selector, which is right here. Okay. The next probably most important thing that you guys probably want to know is this description field. So leaf port selector this description field right here. This is the description field that will be applied to the actual interface. Okay? So, you know, when you do a show interface status, or if I go back over to the inventory and look at this port, this is the description that's going to come up. As I go back to this, you'll see now it says what it is. Okay? A lot of this is because I still like to name these ports. Again, it's totally just a recommendation. There's nothing, no bearing on what you have to do. And as you go through this, you'll get some better familiarity with it. And again, just as another recap, all we did was create a policy. So net new device, create a policy group, apply it to create a port selector under a pre-created. So this was already in existence. We just created a port selector right here, right? You could have done that right here. That would create a new port selector. There's several ways to do it. Hopefully this has been beneficial. This helps. Generally, this section, this access policy section, is where people get tripped up a lot. So I definitely wanted to spend a little bit of time. You know, there's a lot more of the fabric. I'm going to make probably a ton more videos. But feel free, please leave me some feedback. Please leave me suggestions on, hey, can you do a video to show me X, Y, and Z? I will work my best to keep cranking these out. But everybody have a good day, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.